I'm Joni Splett. I'm a faculty member in school psychology at the University of Florida. Do a lot of work around interconnected systems framework. So you might have heard of that if you've been coming to the conference here a few years. Who's heard of ISF? Been to sessions on ISF? Anybody implementing ISF in their district? There we go. Good for you. I need to turn the sound off on my phone. So this isn't necessarily ISF's focus, but if you are implementing or exploring implementing or moving to some type of model like an interconnected systems, then you're going to be exploring screening. And so I've done a lot of work in screening and tried to really unpack not the administration or the measure. So that's not today. Today is getting a plan and what coaching looks like for actually getting your schools to use their data and get students intervention. The whole goal of screening, right, is to get more students intervention, that there's these unidentified needs. If we get a data point on them, we can get intervention. But there's magic kind of that happens in the middle of that as a field we haven't unpacked well. So we've been doing a lot of work on doing that, and that's today. When I say we've been doing a lot of work on doing that, the person who actually does all the magic is Michelle Johnson. She's a coach in Duval County Public Schools, which is Jacksonville, Florida, one of the top 10 largest school districts in the nation. So they have a few schools. And then another key collaborator is Colleen Halliday, who couldn't be with us today, but has a lot of intellectual contributions here. So as I alluded to, we're going to focus on what kind of work do you do with schools to help them use their screening data. To do that, we've used TIPS, team-initiated problem solving. We'll talk about that and give you an understanding of what TIPS looks like at Tier 2, Tier 3 advanced tiers. Learn strategies for incorporating if you have a team that's using data at advanced tiers, how can they incorporate universal screening into that part of that process and get that on their agenda. And then give the exemplar of one district. So this work all comes from several kind of projects over time. In Duval County, it started with Project Aware and some key partners, Katrina Taylor, Rhea Hayes, and the Magic, Michelle Johnson. It also was supported by some funding from the National Institute of Health and the National Institute of Minority Health and Health Disparities specifically, through a project called Project Rise. And then we have one really that's even more specific to today called Project Thrive. So you can see the smarties that go into that, but really at the end of the day, it's the teachers, the educators, the school administrators, the children, youth, the families. We had family advisory boards on all of these who are really who were actually doing the work and figuring out what's working and giving us feedback to tweak things. So my sincerest appreciation always goes to them because I get to work from home sometimes, right? They're the ones that are doing the work and in the trenches. There's my obligatory required acknowledgments to funding agencies. I don't speak on behalf of them. That's all that says. So what is your role here? Just want to get a sense of who's here so we can make sure we're speaking to where you are. If you're at the school district level, is that most school district? Any school building specific, a few? More others are more intermediary agency kind of, or what else? Yeah, say that again. Regional supports, okay. So the full continuum. Any state coordinators or, oh, you guys thought I was gonna leave you out. You weren't gonna, you're like, maybe I should do some screening and make sure everyone gets identified here. All right, so is anybody in their schools that they're in or supporting using universal mental health screening? Only one. Who's exploring it? Very, you're gonna start next year, kind of in the coming years. Who's interested and wish their schools would do it? Okay. Why is everyone else here? What do you want out of this?
Do you consider SRSS?
The school risk, yes. Mm-hmm.
In
Are you doing it, you're doing it like school-wide or grade levels or?
We're doing school-wide and all of our grades.
Wow, okay. Yes, so the SRSS is the Student Risk Screening Scale. It's a checklist. It's actually free, one of the free ones. But it's an interesting, I'd love to unpack why you thought it might not count. But that's a different session. What about your familiarity with TIPS? Anybody have schools using TIPS? Pretty broadly? Anybody trained in TIPS, but anybody completely unfamiliar with TIPS? Okay. So we'll go over what TIPS is. Thank you for giving us a scope of kind of where we are. It helps kind of guide us to next steps. So I'll do a little bit of brief setup of what screening is and what TIPS is, just so that we can all kind of get on a level playing field. But universal mental health screening is this idea that we're going to identify risk early, systematically, and at a population level. So early, I have a thermometer up there. That's not really early. But it is supposed to be. We kind of can, I always give the example of, I know this brings back traumatic memories for everybody, but when we were taking temperatures, teachers were for kids to go to school during the pandemic, whenever kids got to go back to school. But I always thought that was a little hilarious, you know, looking back, that we thought that was an early way of detecting risk. A lot of false positives with that approach. But it gives you a context of what screening is, right? It's also done systematically. I know sometimes when you go through security at the airport, it doesn't feel very systematic. But in theory, it is. They very much like have a protocol that they go through for every single thing. Everybody has a role. Everybody does their role. And in general, you get through pretty quickly, right? It's pretty efficient. I fly out of Orlando a lot, which when you walk up to TSA at Orlando, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm never getting on my plane. Like, it's just full and packed, and everybody's got all this Disney garbage, right? Including my own kids. But suddenly you're through, right? Because they've got roles, they've got protocols, and everybody does it, and they move you through efficiently. And so it's just about being systematic. And then the school example is just that it's a population-wide, and that's however you define it. So it doesn't mean that like it's that you've defined a population and everybody in that population is being screened. So actually in Duval, when we started working there, they were only screening grades 3, 6, and 9. That was the population to define. That was the population they identified as like in their district where kind of some risk points were, right? Especially with transitions in grade 6 and 9, and gave them the kind of, I always think of it like most bang for their buck. We have other schools that are the entire school, grades K to 5, or all of grades 9 and 10. And so however you define your population is that you're doing that population-wide. So what are some non-examples? I think this is helpful. So nomination procedures, just like waiting for teachers to nominate to the child problem-solving team or child study team is not screening. Having forms that they have to complete to refer. When I was working as a school psychologist, that form always deterred referrals. Like, well, Bobby needs help, but there's no way I'm filling out that form and have to go meet with that team. Even referral forms from our community providers who are providing school-based mental health services. It's not to say you can't use those forms, or you should still have a referral system. It's not screening, right? Also, this is happening a lot in Florida thanks to some legislation after Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. There was some language around screening, and in the bill that passed, Duval interpreted it as actually doing mental health screening. Most districts interpreted it as looking at the early warning system data. So they looked at attendance and discipline, and PBIS kind of evolved from that, looked at discipline to identify, behavior intervention needs. It is looking at your data. It is not mental health screening. Discipline is not a good indicator of all mental health needs. We'll talk about that in a second. So this is all the why nots. there's just inequities in all of those systems, right? If a teacher is sensitive to an intervention need, wants and likes outside help, then those students in her class might get intervention help versus the teacher who is like, this is my class, I don't want Bobby to miss class time, there's no way I'm gonna refer for intervention. So it ends up with some inequities in those systems. There's stigmas around it, they're all waiting to fail. They're all, if we're waiting on attendance data problems, which also, and especially in elementary school at least, is not an indicator of mental health. I'm a parent of multiple elementary school students, and they go to school. I'll tell, in the morning we work through and they go to school, right? It's not an indicator of a mental health problem. It's probably because we have family in town and we want to go to Disney. That's why they've missed school. So it just doesn't, those data don't tell us what we want them to. And so we have to get robust indicators that actually do. Another example of this, there's empirical evidence of those inequities, is that we know that those referral procedures just lead to referral of students with externalizing problems more than internalizing. So they're referring the student who's acting out in class, the classroom clown, right? The bully, not the student who's very isolated, feeling disconnected from everyone, having friendship problems, getting rejected, and maybe even anxiety kind of occurring. All of those are those internal things that we don't always see on the outside. This phenomenon is called the squeaky wheel. Squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? It's replicated in research over and over and over again. But it's just a great example. I put it up there to kind of remind you of this is why referral procedures alone are insufficient. So in response to that, a huge plethora of screening measures have been developed, psychometrically tested. School psychologists are fantastic at developing assessment measures and psychometrically testing them and administering them. We have done this. This is good. There are, the student risk screening scale is, up there, you can see. It's an Excel spreadsheet that's free. I think almost all of the other ones up there have some cost associated with them. So this session isn't about what measure do you want to select? I get that question all the time. There was some discussion of it in a session yesterday of what measure, who's using what measure. That's not this session. It's a great conversation. We need to talk through it. I will say you get what you pay for. So, and you're gonna pay for it either if you use the Excel spreadsheet, you're gonna pay for an FTE in technology, right? Or if you buy one of the fancy ones that cost some money, then it'll be a little bit slicker for your team. Maybe your school administrators can actually sign in and use their own data because it populates graphs for them and it's clickable. They're not having to rely on your somebody having amazing Excel techniques. So it's going to cost you regardless. It's just whether you have funding or you have FTE, but you get what you pay for. That being said, once you select an amazing screener, you're gonna have to figure out how to administer it. And I always kind of say schools administer, they know how to administer tests. They do that all the time, all the time, right? So this is complicated, but they know how to do it, and they can do that. It's here that we start losing people, is that, okay, we collected data, but it's in a different platform than we're used to doing. It was the PBIS initiative, not, my initiative. We were collecting data for years with Duval, and principals shockingly had no idea, had never even opened or looked at their data. They just completed it because they were told to. And so our goal is to kind of sort out that miracle, and not make it such a magic unknown, I hope, thoughts and prayers, hope this happens, but that we actually have some strategies to use. And one of my biggest reasons for this is a study we just published, last year or so, But we, in a different district we'd been working with, we had it's the Interconnect, if you look at the only published randomized control trial results of the Interconnected Systems Framework, it's one of those districts. So in 4 of those schools, for 2 years under a randomized trial, we'd been implementing screening and supporting their teams, those 4 schools, to use their data, right? And we got good outcomes. So right as that study ended, they had a bridge funding for the next year, and also Marjory Stoneman Douglas happened. And all the districts in the state got, for the next school year, and even continuing, they've got some pretty large resource allocations for the state that are specific for mental health. And so just the timing of it, the district was like, we're gonna go district-wide with screening. And I was like, do you need any help? They're like, nope, we can do this. I was like, well, can I follow along then? So they ended up just going elementary school-wide. That's a whole different story. I got to follow along with like 6 schools. I did, for the first year I convinced them, was like, just screen in January so we can get a baseline of like who got intervention before you screened, then you screened, and let's see who gets intervention after, left to your own devices, right? So they had some institutional knowledge of some strategies, because we had, Kelly Perales and the Midwest team had been working with them for 2 years on implementing ISF. And we're like, let's see what you can do left to your own devices. So when they screened in January, they had about, in the 6 schools, they had 3,000 students. That seems really low. Maybe it's only 4 schools. I need to go back, because Florida elementary schools are ginormous. 68% of those students had no risk. 32% screened at an elevated or extremely elevated risk. This is a teacher report form at the elementary school level. And 32%, you might be like, ooh, that's really high. It is a higher need district, first of all. And you are, when you screen, you get false positives. So you are gonna be higher than 20%. And like, I've never seen screening results with less than 20% risk. So you are gonna probably be higher than that. But it is pretty high, and it's a high need district. So we said, okay, who was receiving, and we had all this data collection and work, I won't go into the procedures, but who was receiving intervention beforehand? And we saw that of those 32%, 3% of them receiving intervention previously. So screening did its job. It identified 29% of the students, like a huge chunk. 90% of the students with risk were newly identified. So it did its job. But our real question was, what happened after? Who got intervention after? And only a 2% bump after. Now, they didn't have a whole school year, but left to their own devices, only a 2% bump. And when I say left to their own devices, like, they didn't have a coach, they didn't have, the district had all these protocol for administering the measure. There was no protocol or systems or district support in using the data. So it's the schools that were left to their own devices, right? And I'm just not surprised, because the school principal isn't used to working with mental health data. It wasn't their initiative. They were just told to collect it. They've got so much other things going on, right? And so they need those supports and strategies. We can't just ask them to create it themselves. So this is really kind of what motivated that, and why I use this picture is because we can't just let a miracle happen. We have to think systematically of how, and come up with plans and strategies to do that. So what we've done, so the idea is that, I'm sure you've seen this if you've been in any ISF presentations, but the idea is like, you can't ride your bike if you don't have a framework for it and put it all together. So having a framework for actually using the data is the important next steps. And what we've found useful is to use TIPS, so team-initiated problem solving. TIPS is an evidence-based database decision-making within teams process. It's been researched out of the University of Oregon. It's all over the PBIS website if you just search TIPS. But it's a process for steps for a problem-solving team, as well as a process that teaches a group of people to how to have efficient meetings, productive meetings, and use a problem-solving model in those meetings. It was research-based at Tier 1 with discipline data. So all the evidence is around reducing school discipline, office discipline referrals at a universal school-wide level. There's some ongoing work looking at it at Tier 2 also with discipline data. And so we've modified it more on the mental health screening side of like, here's a problem-solving team, a Tier 2, 3 intervention team, using discipline data already, and here's some mental health screening data also. So we've worked through some modifications because those data sets are different and they require different steps and procedures. So a little bit more about TIPS, the evidence base for it, it's been shown more efficient. Team members report it to be more satisfying, which I think is awesome because who gets tired of being in horrible meetings? And then you start finding ways to skip that meeting and have a lot of grudge and like cannot believe I have to go to that meeting today. So one thing I think just basic level is make the team meeting satisfying. They'll show up and do the work. It helped them identify problems earlier. They had better precision. They built solution and action plans. And not only did they write down an action plan, but the next week, they came back and followed through on it. So students were getting intervention, and really that evidence is at Tier 1. So action plans were more around changing like pushing supervision into recess or reteaching some behavioral expectation. And so through that they brought down discipline referrals. It has 2 core components. The first is meeting foundation, so having a purpose, an agenda. There's logistics and roles. There's a ton of materials on PBIS.org on TIPS. So if you want that, I encourage you to go find it. But it's both meeting foundations and a database problem-solving process. And so just a few examples here. So having a clear purpose statement is really important in TIPS. It's a reminder for everybody, and it keeps everybody kind of focused on like the why are we here, so you don't get sidetracked on like planning other things or like I needed to talk to so-and-so about this other side topic, and the meeting doesn't get taken over by that just because you guys happen to be meeting together. It keeps you focused, right? So we've modified purpose somewhat for Tier 2, 3 teams that are using universal screening data, that they're coordinating and identifying and selecting students in need of Tier 2, 3 supports, monitoring implementation fidelity of those supports, monitoring progress, and making decisions and action plans with that. So it's very specific, and it's not all at a student level. So there are some student-specific conversations in there, but it's getting that team to talk about the entire system of service delivery that they're running and that they're coordinating. There's roles and responsibilities prescribed in TIPS. You have a facilitator who brings the agenda and facilitates the whole meeting. You have a data analyst and all of these roles and responsibilities have a before, during, and after meeting like list of roles and responsibilities. So like the data analyst shows up with the screening data already kind of analyzed and looked through, and a plan of leading the team through, and it's probably talked to the facilitator and a plan of leading the team through looking at that data. Versus, I'll never forget the team meeting I joined in those schools that I presented data on. They spent the whole meeting trying to download the spreadsheet of their screening data, trying to figure out how to get it downloaded and displayed, right? No, if you have a team member role for a data analyst, they're ready to go with that for that meeting. Because they want that meeting to be efficient and productive and ready for everyone, then they've already done that. You have a minute taker also, and you always have an administrator because you want it to be prioritized, but the administrator has no role because other than just showing up as an administrator with resource decision making, right? There's no role. And all of these have backups. Here's a look at the flow of a meeting in TIPS. We can look at it later. I'm running short of time. This is the database decision-making process. I think you guys all know that. We know database decision-making processes, and TIPS is not all that different than anything else. That's just the idea that we incorporated screening. And this is to point out that that screening data is different than discipline data. That it's discipline data, I know you get multiple views of your discipline data like in Swiss, right? But in theory, you only have like 5% of your students who are identified right on that. In screening, you get every single student is on that. And you've got to be able to navigate the platform to drill down to, you know, the concerns that you need to be looking at or what your team is focused on that right now. So it requires a different skill set that you've got to prepare your data analyst for. So because of some of those things, we've made minor modifications to TIPS. We expanded the team membership to make sure that there is someone with mental health expertise on there, and usually multiple people, so they can talk through like a student's profile because they're probably hitting risk in multiple areas. We can talk through that profile and identify the interventions that are best for it. We've also added in protocol for them doing resource mapping and data decision rules. Michelle's going to give you great examples of that, so I won't go too much. And we've added forms for tracking referrals and intervention logs so that you can follow through each meeting with who's on the intervention plan and how progress is occurring. So with that very high level overview, I'm going to hand it over to Michelle to give our exemplar of using TIPS to actually use your screening data.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for being here for the last session. I'm sure everybody's probably pretty eager to get home. I'm just going to share a little snapshot of what it looks like, the real behind the scenes, how we do this work in Duval County. Duval County, just a little understanding, is a really large district. We have a lot of schools. To that, I will just say that this work did not start and is not in every single school. We did start with the SAMHSA Aware grant, which was more like mental health literacy, beginning to implement and understand what mental health is all about for the classroom teacher, for the schools, trauma-informed schools, building the MTSS, which we did not have well established in the district, which thanks to that, we were initially in 6 schools. So we started small. We began to tap into universal screening, again, using implementation science, very, very small number of schools, and then gradually building up. So we've been very fortunate not just to have the implementation grant, but as Joni said, the RISE grant and then Project Thrive. We are continuing to build up, but what I'm really happy to say with Project Aware, there's many, many practices. Sustainability was always preached, and I'd encourage you to continue to keep that lens always. We have so many things that now are continued from Project Aware and the great work that was started almost 10 years ago. But one of the things I just want to say is I want to thank Joni, because it is because of her, first off, that I get to be here. Our grant is a research grant. Travel is not paid for, so I really appreciate that opportunity. But we have been very, very fortunate, starting with Aware, to have Florida PBIS, and then on projects Rise and Thrive, we've had Joni, we've had several people from the University of Florida, we have Dr. Holliday, we've had Kent McIntosh, we have Kelly Perales. I have her in my ear every Tuesday. We have really benefited from expertise. And you might say, well, we don't have a grant, Michelle, that's not gonna work with us. But one thing I do know is that the PBIS, the national structure, as well as the districts and areas, have so many good resources that even if you don't have Kelly Perales in your ear every week, you can do this work. And we just started out small and we continue to build. Yes, we used the ISF. We had to learn what that was. We had to understand that we needed to stop working in silos. Some of you are very familiar with this language, but people still like to work in their comfort zone. So part of our work is getting people all to the table. There's nothing that excites me more as a coach is seeing all these different people at the table. Yes, we need administration because we need somebody with decision-making capacity. We need those community mental health providers. We need ESE, we need teachers, we need individuals that touch the students and can really do the work. The single system of delivery we found has been fantastic over the years. And again, this is 10 years of work. But now we are doing enhanced screening. We're really focusing on what's really best for kids, but it does take ongoing coaching because schools are tasked with many, many demands. And one of my roles, I'm very, very connected with relationships in the building, some of my visual aids. And I'm always of the mindset of how can I make this, how can we work smarter, not harder, and how can my role, since we have the luxury of the grant, how can I empower and support schools and make sure that when we meet, that we are going to use good use of our time, and if schools are disheveled and there's been a major crisis, then what can I bring to the table to ensure we have success? I'm always trying to look through that lens. I don't want to overcompensate for schools, but there's no reason if you come to the table and you've accidentally forgotten your data. I want to be able to help schools bridge that gap because we're busy and we need to be able to do this work. It's very important work. What I'm finding in my work, I'm in 9 schools. The teams consist of people that have already been on, like I said, we built the MTSS, so we have something called a collaborative problem-solving team. When we went in to do the work of Rise and Thrive, we went in to look at existing PBIS team or collaborative problem-solving team. Nobody wants one more meeting, so we got these individuals at the table and we continue to do the work. There's certain structures that make this work really well. I'm going to briefly talk about all the different things we used. One of the best things is to get a commitment of a school, and this is just practical tools. I create a calendar invite. We decide when we're going to meet. I meet with schools twice a month, and we have a regular designated time for meetings. That way, if you don't feel good today, we're still going to be having the meeting. It's on your calendar, right? So we really carefully carve out time to do this very important, and we're intentional about our practice. That's just a little screenshot. We need confidential space, so when you're getting together with your team, yes, we're talking about students, we're talking about mental health, we're talking about different things, but I also make sure that we include all the important things on the calendar so there's no surprises, okay? Teams know, schools know, we can plan for that. I do lots and lots of friendly reminders. I've learned a lot about Outlook and calendar and all that. So it helps to keep this on the school's radar, on the team's radar, because this is important. Yes, Joni says we use tips and we need to use tips. It is easy to get into a sea of a lot of different things. And so I see tips as kind of like training us, but it is such an effective use of time. I'm in my 2nd year with this first cohort. They know what to expect. They're all ready now. We're going to go through this process each and every time. It's going to look the same. We're going to be efficient, and we're going to get out on time. We don't have time to waste, right? No one has extra time. We use a lot of these tools, which I'll just share. The other thing that has been really key to the work is getting a confidential space in Microsoft Teams, which we use Teams. So we have our Thrive team. So if the 9 schools have a Thrive team, we put all of our documents, as I talk about all these documents, the documents are really essential to how we do the work. It's kind of like the puzzle pieces that make it fit together. But anyone on the team is in that confidential space, and you can access data and different tools that we use at all times. So common space for that. The thing that you saw just fly all over the floor is what I do is I make some visual aids. These are laminated. These are the roles. People don't automatically know the roles, right? We have summer training for the teams, which is paid for, but this gives them what happens, what they're supposed to be doing. So they each get a folder in the summer, and it's so exciting for me because it's really not a waste of my time, because I see them pull these out in meetings. And you might think, oh my gosh, this is just crazy. But remember, people are busy, and I want to be sensitive to that. I might not be their priority. Their role in this meeting may not be what they focus on every day. I live in this, and I know people don't, right? So I want to empower them to be successful and have what they need to do what we need to accomplish. So I have one of these for each of the meetings, and it's worked really well. Yes, we use the TIPS Meeting Foundation. We kind of covered that already. It just really helps to streamline our work. Now, we have modified the TIPS form, and you're going to see a little bit how we use this. Again, it was to streamline our work, but the same thing happens every meeting. We come together, we have an agenda. We are reviewing how many requests for assistance. So we have developed a form, it's called Request for Assistance. Teachers have access, building level people have access to this. We're looking at how many requests for assistance have we received, and What's the time between getting the request for assistance and getting help? A lot of work happens outside of the meeting because, as Joni said, we can't do one-by-one students. I'm in schools with almost 1,000 kids. 3 of my schools have right at 1,000. These are huge elementary schools. So a lot of work happens out. So if we have requests for assistance, we have the data analyst, we have the intervention coordinator. They can match students to intervention. So we can say, yes, we've already done this and that. Then we look at the different types of interventions that we have, and we look at how many students are in each intervention and how many students are responding. We do resource mapping. What's in the building? What resources are available, right? Where are we referring these kids to? So we often find that people don't know what's available in the building. They really don't, and it's sad because there's still people working in silos. There might be community partners, mentorships going on, the military family life counselor, people that aren't collaborating with the school, and so we don't know what's happening with kids, but this is a way to get us all together. This is used throughout the TIPS meeting process throughout the year as we have data and we're placing students in intervention. As I said, we have decision rules, so it's not really willy-nilly. We are very carefully looking at what it takes to get in the intervention, what we're doing to continue to monitor the fidelity and the progress, and then how you get out of it. You'll see an example. These schools are refining their practice. They're continuing to learn more and continuing to develop more precise work. Realistically, everyone can't have every skill from ground zero, but the continuing mindset of empowering and supporting to create change has been super important. And I'm very eager to get all these things done, but I have to also be realistic with the teams. And I want to be sensitive and keep them with me and gaining that buy-in all along so they'll continue to show up and meet. Here's an example of a request for assistance. We have presented that to faculty, so someone on the Thrive team will present it to the faculty, share how they can get access. Sometimes it's hard copy, sometimes it's electronic, but then we have these for our meeting, right? Really important to know, and it's usually a lot of business is taken care of prior to the meeting. One of the things teams needed was to understand what precision problem solving is. Anybody go in meetings where people glamorize the problem? Takes a lot of facilitation skills and to be able to continue to get people back on target. But one of the things, again, my lamination, they all have this, the who, what, where, when, how, and why, so they can begin to understand where we're going. Also, within the TIPS meeting, page 2, which was not on the screen, we have the precision problem solving process broken down. Sometimes we discuss really challenging students with this process at a meeting. We talk about groups of kids. We can't talk about everyone individually, but we will discuss and formulate action plans for those kids. So again, way to help gain the buy-in. This is an example of the precision problem solving process. It's on the TIPS form and the action plan. In this beginning work, schools are gaining their experience in looking at data. Oftentimes they'll place a child in intervention. We're not looking at fidelity. We're not looking at outcomes. We don't want to keep a child in an intervention that's not working, right? So another way that helps the teams develop the use of data with interventions is understanding that nobody has time to keep someone in check-in and check-out from September to May, right? So we're learning to be more efficient in our work. We have action steps. We have data that we're monitoring to help students with the interventions. We have screened up for universal screening, as I said before, starting small, continuing to go forward. Universal screening has been a process in our district that we have continued to grow and expand. It's really important that everyone gains an understanding of what this process is going to be, schools, parents, so that we can be successful. We determine the screening windows in fall and spring. I will tell you that our district, because of the mental health allocation, only screens in the fall. So this was a big stretch. Ask them when I was talking to administrators and teams, we're gonna screen what? Who, how many? And so yes, we do that in fall and spring, and it's pretty exciting to be able to have that data. There's a lot of training that goes to administration and also the points of contact. These are individuals that have access directly to the platform and can be able to take that data and share that with their teams. But again, I also do a lot of that to ensure that we are learning how to use the platform. We do a lot of professional development and training. The EIS is a student self-report. We've never done that in elementary before. It's brand new for us. We're very excited. We're doing it in 4th and 5th grade. Our whole plan was whole school, but Florida has had some recent legislation that would have required more extensive parental permission. We use an opt-out form with heavy information to educate parents on what we're looking for, frequently asked questions. At the end of the day, if you prefer your child not to participate in screening, just return it to the school. So we have to be sensitive that some parents are not comfortable with screening. I will say when I first started with Project Aware, like 10 years ago, it was very, very different. This year alone, I have had more parents opt out in those 9 schools than I've ever seen before. My spreadsheet is humongous. I didn't really share that with Joni. She's probably not really happy. But again, I think there's factors that happen, whether it is in your state, that are beyond your control, so flexibility is key. I love this. I use a leaderboard to track progress. So all those 9 schools, I place their completion rates for principals so they can see that. It really creates friendly competition. I am really happy to say we've screened last spring and this fall. We have had more than 70%. Usually most schools, 99, 100% participation. And I was blown away. I didn't think we'd see that, but the schools are really, again, buying in, understanding our goal and purpose is to help kids that previously we didn't know about. And we know kids are struggling, and we know in Jacksonville, there's a lot of community data that influences our work. We have a lot of shooting. We just had that horrible tragedy. So we know that if we aren't looking carefully at all the factors to help students, we're missing kids. PBIS is nice. Again, we purchased it initially for the platform. It gave us what we were looking for, but it also has strengths. All right, so we could go and build from strengths. We can do problem solving from strengths and areas of concern. The EIS, again, it was brand new for us. We began doing this. You can see the school building at a glance, and what I like about it, you can click on a question. It's gonna show all the kids, whether at highest risk or some risk. It is very easy to begin to formulate a group. Again, we never look at one piece of data alone. We look at lots of data, but this is easy. Like, I don't have a person I can turn to for help at school. We can see who has a need and begin to get more information and formulate the groups readily. Could also take a child and just look at their profile individually. We don't do the teacher checklist with the EIS. We do that with PBIS. Again, we started PBIS a long time ago. Teachers are familiar with it. But this is a nice example of a sample child and how you can look individually on where the child is. A big part of what we do, and this is projected in a meeting, we want to know who's on, who's been referred, right? Our requests for assistance, our data decision making from our teams, and then what interventions they're in, right? And so we are looking at this form during meeting, and our data analyst can be putting, our intervention coordinator can be putting in the names of students we can be talking about. We can sort and filter easily. We've got 10 kids in check-in and check-out. We've got 5 kids in a small group with the school counselor. So we can easily see what intervention students are getting. Some feedback from one of the principals is, like, we need to be able to know that this is an effective use of our time. We need data outcomes. First year, that school was not good about that. We are continuing to refine the practice of using this intervention receipt form. It's done every month. I send a friendly calendar invite to the data analyst and the /intervention coordinator. Please send this to me. It's the last Friday of the month. I'm really happy to report of the 9 schools, I've already gotten 3 that I know about, and it's Friday. So the last Friday of the month. But again, you're developing practices that are consistent so teams are more likely to do them. We're real intentional about the work. It's gonna be consistent over time. We're gonna keep doing these things. We've learned a lot of lessons at Duval. I've learned a lot of lessons. I've been very fortunate to be coached through a team of amazing experts, and anytime I can go to them for help. Teams need a lot of technical assistance when starting up, but we also need to support them in buy-in and understanding why we're doing the work. Every time I continue to remind them that at the end of the day, we've done things that have never been done before, and we're helping kids that we now know are struggling in silence. And we didn't know that before because we only did externalizing data. Everybody can see the acting out kids, right? But these kids, there's kids struggling, and we know that. And I don't know how it is about your districts, We have high rates of suicide in Duval County, way too many. I'm now focused in elementary. My prior work was middle school. We've had students in elementary die by suicide. One child crying for help, but no one sees it, is one too many. So every day we can all join that value of helping kids at the end of the day that we might not have noticed before. Realistic expectations. We came into a system the school already had going, lots of moving parts in schools. I want to be sensitive to that. Being able to access resources and help schools understand what's available in the building. We also do a great job of resource mapping in the district, but just being really informative, and those can change over time. We could have mentors come in the middle of the school year that's going to mentor 10, 20 kids. So we need to be reevaluating our resource map and finding out what we have available. That problem-solving mindset. First year was a real challenge. Quit, glamorizing the problem. How can we be more scientific in our approach? Also kind of interesting in the problem-solving model, because we brought mental health people to the table. They never saw universal screening data before. And I've got to tell you, with the exception of the third grade, the school counselor, nobody else at that table had seen screening data either. So we have now people that are doing mental health, because we have community mental health providers in schools, thanks to Marjorie Stoneman Douglas School Public Safety Act and the unfortunate happenings at Marjorie Stoneman. We have mental health providers learning about how to make database decisions along with us. So that's pretty exciting, but problem solving is always our lens. Database decision-making does take time, because it's easier to go back. Well, I don't think they're doing good in school, or they're just struggling, they got a problem, I know they need help, or they don't need help, there's nothing wrong. And so one of the things with universal screening, the internalizing and the database decision-making, I'm now struggling, trying to get help and support from the people that are coaching me. A lot of people at the table are dismissing the internalizing factors. One of the questions is, I felt hopeless. We have a large percentage of students saying, I felt hopeless always. We have students that are, I feel lonely always. Again, you saw the drop-down box, so I can click on that red and see all those kids. What I didn't realize early on, I wasn't prepared emotionally for the impact that this data would have on adults. And I found myself in a meeting with the teacher crying. This is overwhelming, what are we gonna do? So I've gone from teachers being emotionally impacted, and I as a coach didn't really adequately prepare the team that this is gonna be highly emotional data, possibly, to teachers saying, I know that kid, they're not showing that. Well, that's the whole point. Internalizing, we don't often see. And so this is a big growth area for us, and we are beginning to really navigate that with the help of experts, because we have so many students struggling, but yet we have people at the table saying that's not really real. And when we use an evidence-based instrument, we're not making this up. Teacher reads the prompt, students respond to faces. They don't have to read, they respond to a face and click on a face. So again, challenges, that data can be super sensitive, lots of positive incentives, which we do with the grant, prompts, reminders. You're doing a great job at bringing this meeting together. I want to empower people to do this work, and I know it does work, because on the middle school grant, which was RISE, one of the neatest compliments to the work, and I used to only meet with them once a month, do the same type of process, bringing data, community, everyone to the table, looking at interventions and support for kids. But one of my schools said, even before we had finished the grant cycle, they're like, we're doing this every week without you, Michelle. I thought it was a little excited and unrealistic, but they're like, we're doing this, and we're doing this after you finish and after your work finishes. So sustainable practices do develop when people see the worth and they buy in. But remember, first and foremost, for me, it's about those relationships. I want to be able to share the value that I have for the people at the table, and we can all align around this work, and we always meet with purpose and do good work. And prepare for the unexpected. Unfortunately, you probably all know only too well of all the legislation that has impacted Florida, that has kind of put some constraints on our work, even constraints on what we can say. But we still continue to move forward, because there's so many things that we can do right for kids and new ways to help them. And so we continue to be optimistic about those things. So that's just me, a little bit of how it works in Duval. And if you have any questions, we'd be happy to entertain those, Joni and I. But I think this is work, even if you don't have the team of experts holding your hand, I think you can do it in your district.
Thanks, Michelle. I appreciate you brought your props. Who has questions?
They love these.
Yeah.
Did you get pushback with your intervention? I think you call it intervention, so you have the app for it too.
The intervention receipt form is really based on what happens at the team or outside of the team where students are placed in intervention. It's funny you should say that. The first year, teams weren't all that good about doing it. Then we decided we needed to do an intensive training for the data analyst and the intervention coordinator because it is a 2-tab spreadsheet. I live in the world of spreadsheets thanks to all their training. Schools don't. But as Joni said, some people, spreadsheets are their jam. Sure enough, last week I was at a school and she said, I love spreadsheets. Thank God she's the intervention coordinator. She's doing this, So there are some people who like that, but yes, we got pushback. We got pushback to everything. This has not been easy peasy work. This is challenging.
But I think we figured out it's when we assign roles, we talk about who's going to make a good facilitator, who's going to make a good, so the intervention coordinator, we explicitly say who here likes Excel spreadsheets? And so it's assigned to someone who's has some self-efficacy in using an Excel spreadsheet. And then it's also displayed during the team meetings. So they're not, they're only filling in what goes on in between. It's populated as part of the team meeting for for 80% of it is in that meeting.
Can you talk?
Just making sure I didn't make a mistake in the last session before. It wasn't me. Can you talk a little bit about your process for once you have screened and have matching students to intervention based off of the data, and maybe a little bit of how did you select standard protocol interventions, what intervention, how did you set up your systems for intervention so that once you find them, you have something that
Right.
It's the resource map.
So we did the resource map and looked what was in the school. Then we formulated the decision rules. So what gets you into check-in and check-out? But also I let the schools have a lot of autonomy with that. Some schools said, well, if they do a safety violation, if they do these occurrences, then they're going to go to check-in and check-out. But the decision rules helped understand what I have done, and I'm empowering the schools this year to pull their own data. I brought the data, and I have the data and the critical index students. And so then we begin to determine what intervention is appropriate for them if it hasn't been done outside of the meeting. For Tier 2, we like to start with check-in and check-out if it's appropriate. Research shows about 70% will respond to that. We do have some small groups with what we now call in Florida resiliency. Y'all might know it as social emotional. We call it resiliency.
we're from Georgia. We get it.
And so we have some small groups for those skills. We have used the Match ADT curriculum previously. I bring that to the counselors and the clinicians that are doing small groups so they can use it also. It's an evidence-based, excellent material for kids. It's called Match ADTC.
It's a modular approach to treatment for children.
Anxiety, depression,
Trauma and conduct.
Yeah.
It's by Bruce Sharpita.
But we also use Sanford Harmony a lot in Florida. We use Second Step so that we have provided resources to the people doing the small groups to help support the areas that we see. Emotional regulation is huge. And I will say across all 9 schools, the internalizing behavior, the whole category itself is red, which means more than 20% of kids were at or highest risk in that domain. So we know kids really, really need this help.
And she mentioned the check-in, check-out. We use that, we call it an early access. So really any kind of, you have your extremely elevated and elevated, and what our data in the other study I talked about showed is the students getting intervention were those extremely elevated. So we use check and check out, build a really efficient system, lots of people trained on it, making time and space for it for those who screen at more of an elevated level, just to get eyes and ears of an adult on the student and get more information. And really the powerful ingredient of check in, check out is that connection to an adult in the school, right? Who cares about your behavior and well-being and self-success in school, that you've got that connection. I know it's got a lot of evidence base for externalizing, but there's some emerging work that's really modified it and showed promise for internalizing also. And if you think about that powerful ingredient, then it really is pervasive across your type of mental health need. So we use it as instead of like going through everybody that's at an elevated risk, just put as many as you can on check in, check out for a month and see who needs more.
Because our data is showing us kids are lonely. They have no one to talk to at school. They're telling us what they need if we just listen.
And
Yeah.
a clarifying point, when you say check in, check out, are you talking
Like they're,
like with the DPR?
DPR, yes, exactly.
they don't always do the, yeah, it's usually the student is just like doing a DPR during the day. Does that make sense? So, and it depends. I mean, they've got the systems work out of like, this is a mental health need that was at risk. So they go to this check in, check out person who does a teacher rated DPR because it's an externalizing mostly concern, right? An attention problem kind of thing. Or, and this person is doing those who are reporting like more internalizing concerns. And so their DPR is a self-rated one.
But we use things like feelings thermometer
Yeah, it's more of that's exactly what it is. Yes.
to help children learn and understand about emotions and regulation. Yes, yeah, real important.
But that's still limited.
With a check in, check out, like, yeah. And another project we have, I mean, they did this themselves, but one of the cafeteria helpers, they've made a check in, check out person because apparently he like knows every kid by name, everybody loves him. Like, it's a fantastic strategy. I mean, that powerful ingredient, yeah, he can do it.
And I just want to remind you, it's a work in progress. This work has been going on for quite a while, but there are sustainable practices that I'm really excited about that when we started this 10 years ago are in place still today. It can be done. And the nice thing about being on a research project, it's kind of a love-hate relationship because they continue to make me do these things on timelines. I'm like, we're busy. We've had a lot of things happen. But it does help us to refine our practice with objectivity and intent, and it is a great reminder to stay on target because the big picture is out there. I navigate between little picture and big picture. I've learned a lot as a coach because I'm used to just, am I doing this certain thing right? But also we have to look at big picture, and because of the research and the expertise on the work, it has really helped us develop this, and I'm really proud of the work that we've done together in our district. We have a lot more to do, but we've got a good start.
We can stay around for any other questions if people have them, but I also think, I don't know what time it is. Is it 1? Nice. So there's a bunch of resources I listed up there too, with links to them, but there's several videos on tips and tools at the PBIS website. There's practice briefs. I have a best practice guide on screening if you want a review of measures and other implementation strategies. And we have a teaming guide coming soon if some PBIS co-directors would edit it. I hope, huh? Oh yeah, the eval slide. Thank you guys so much for coming.
Thank you for coming.
Please complete the evaluation.